Hello and welcome to Murder Analysed. I'm Christina Moore. Now today's case is another case of a rape and murder by a paedophile. This girl lived in Southampton, UK. She was 13-year-old when she died, and the person that murdered her was Stephen Nicholson. So this again is going to be a case that I'm going to have to put a warning out about, because the content within this video is disturbing. Because it contains, again, sexual abuse of a minor and a rape of her when she was 12, then the continuous abuse of Lucy, who was then murdered by her abuser at the age of 13. And so this case, again, discretion is needed. If you don't think this case is for you, then switch off now. So today's case is Lucy McHugh case. Lucy was from Southampton in the United Kingdom. She was murdered by Stephen Nicholson and also abused by him. So I think the best thing to do is start off with Lucy's case is right from the beginning of where this all started. The case of Lucy McHugh has got quite a bit bits of variables in it, really. It's about Lucy and about the abuse and the murder. It then brings in some new laws into this case that they had to use to gain access to certain passwords and stuff on Facebook. So I talk a little bit about the new laws that are involved in this. It also talks about the predator, Stephen Nicholson, and his background. And believe it, he is a psychopath, and he's been locked away for a long time. But as with all these, sooner or later, this man will get out. So this story, this case, is a shocking case from all angles, really, because it's another case that should have been picked up way before this child was murdered. And it isn't through lack of people reporting things about the situation that was going on here, but it's about the lack of care or duty of care from social services and other agencies to really step in when it was needed to be. So this case is sort of a mixture. Lucy came from an environment where she was very used to violence. She was used to it from her parents when they were together. So she was used to this household, I think, of where violence was there, and she was used to it. And I've spoke about domestic violence and the effects it will have on children, and also why this girl probably didn't say anything about this abuse that was going on with her. So Stephen Nicholson, he was 25 at the time when he murdered Lucy, but he moved into Lucy's home as a lodger, an on and off lodger, would stay there, and at the age of 12 he raped Lucy, and that was really the start of the abuse, and he continued to abuse her. She told school friends, but she didn't want to tell anyone else because, one, she felt she wasn't going to be believed. Now, I think she probably would have been. Because even though the violence from the parents and then the violence between the mother and the boyfriend was one thing, I think when you're talking about a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old who probably like this man, because as we talked about with all these predators, they are very, very manipulative. They are very, very good at what they do. And he was like that. Even though he came across as a real narcissist, he came across believable. So I don't think that Lucy felt that if she told anyone, she'd be believed. But she also told her friends that if she wasn't believed, she knew that that abuse was going to get worse and worse and worse. So in Lucy's mind, by this stage, we were talking about a 12 and a 13-year-old now, sort of became infatuated with Nicholson. Because this was her first sexual experience at 13, this was a relationship now to her. He was now not just raping her, but now having a relationship with her. And she told friends that she felt she was pregnant by him. Plus, I think she had told him, Nicholson, that she was pregnant by him. So the problem is with Nicholson, as any paedophile, he didn't want to get caught. And so he decided what he was going to do was to kill Lucy when she was 13-year-old. So he asked to meet her, and she would do as she was told. And it was behind like the Southampton, it's a sports centre. There's some woods behind there. And he met her behind there this day in July. So it was a nice sunny day. And she probably felt, well, we've been there before. It's probably going to be the same as it usually is, where they're going to have sex and he's going to discard her like he usually does. But that wasn't what Nicholson thought, because he's now worried that she's now going to tell. Unbeknownst to him, though, she had told, and them children had told other people. But he killed her. He killed her, one, because he thought if she's pregnant, people are going to find out. And he didn't want to be known as a paedophile, even though that's what he was. So I think he stabbed her about 25 times. But what he did, and the autopsy sort of and the police reports show, it was more like an execution murder, what he did to her. You know, shocking really, when you think about it. That this man abused this girl from 12, very young child, for over a year. She then believed that she was in a relationship with him. And he asked her to go to this wood where she's thinking she's going to meet him. And he ends up literally executing her. Shocking. So because Lucy became from this, I suppose, disruptive, violent household with the mother and the father, and then the mother and the boyfriend, the social services were involved. And so they was going and keeping a close eye on her and stuff, or were meant to. And I don't know if Nicholson was meant to be there as a lodger. And a lot of people rent out rooms when they haven't got a lot of money to earn extra money. And I don't think he stayed there all the time, but I think he did stay there on and off. So I don't know if the social services knew about that, but they certainly knew that this child came from a home that should have been monitored. She was still very young. And I think the thing is with teachers, now I've been a teacher, a lecturer for many years, and we have a duty of care to our students. So when we see something going on or we feel there's something going on, we have a duty to report it. And if other students come to us, yes, it may be hearsay, but when it's something that's like she's being abused, which she told her friends and her friends have told teachers, that's something that is instantly reported. Now there's nothing else then that as a teacher you can do. You must follow the protocol of this, and the protocol is that you do a referral, and the referral was done to the social services, who then should have checked this out a lot and then would have reported it to the police, and then this girl may have been saved. But we don't really know, because I don't think the report's over yet, or it's coming up to be finished. But you know, we have a lot of these cases, so many so that all these services are overwhelmed, and this is where these cases slip through the net. And this is why, I mean, the social services, would they have saved her, or could they have saved her? Maybe, but this man, this Stephen Nicholson, is a killer. He's a sexual predator. He's a paedophile. And we know that because she wasn't his only victim. And I think once then he got away with one murder, how many more murders would this man have done? Because this man wasn't easy to catch. So when they found Lucy's body, and there's a big search out, and you'll see later on if I put some things up on about the CCTV and things, this man was not easy to catch. This man was not a stupid man. He'd covered his tracks quite well. But I think what they do is underestimate the child, because a child may tell you they're not saying anything, but they probably are, to someone, to their friends, and their friends, who's probably not as afraid as Lucy was, is now telling teachers, and then teachers are now telling other people. But then it's put down as hearsay unless you have evidence, and in this case for a very long time there was no evidence of anything. Now let's talk about this Stephen Nicholson and his background, because it's shocking really. In 2009, when he was 14, he was in like a children's home. He's a resident of, in Southampton, UK. It's a children's home. Now this boy was already displaying behaviours that were, for a 14-year-old in a children's home, yes, you may have ADHD and you may have other things, and you have kids getting into trouble, but this boy was displaying, I think, psychopathic tendencies at a very young age. And at 14, he held hostage some of the students and staff members in this home that he was a resident at. So a county-run children's home. Now, he threatened these students and the staff with a knife. So he was already at 14 displaying these behaviours. Plus then he stole £1,000 and this, that and the other. And he was convicted then, I think, of, criminal damage of property, and I think affray, with the threat of the knife. And I think, he's now a juvenile. Now there's some, I think, cases when you're juvenile where you're using an offensive weapon, or whether like this you've held people hostage, many people hostage, threaten them with a knife, threaten them with the behaviour, plus then you've done theft. This is a juvenile, 14-year-old, with this displaying this sort of behaviour, not once but twice. He was quite a nasty piece of work. This boy from a very young age didn't really care, couldn't be controlled, but this is a juvenile record now. This is not now a record that's now going to either follow him on, or if it is, it's not going to, which it's probably not because it's juvenile. So once you're 18 and you've done nothing else, that would be gone. But in 2012, he was then arrested again. He was found guilty of sexual activity with a 14-year-old. So there was, and this is what we know about. And with all these cases, I always say it's not always what we know, it's what we don't know. So we have this boy, this man, this 25-year-old now, in 2018, 4 years later, after he was charged with the first assault on a young girl of 14. So now we know he's sort of age-specific age, don't we? Like some 12, 14. Really, I think with this man, any age would have done if he could have got it. But I think his age range, what he was looking for, was that, because this is the sort of girls he went for. And then when he moved into Lucy's home and he saw Lucy, he was attracted to her straight away. Now you're talking about a 12-year-old girl now that's raped by this quite violent, or very violent, man in her own home, who then he's groomed from that to have a relationship and killed her in 2018. So this man had a background. But also the school now, don't forget, now know that this girl was being abused because they've been told, and so they would have made their referrals to social services. And this was a long time before, a good few months before she died. Nothing was done. So that it's difficult now, because he didn't stay there regularly and no one saw this going on, and it's only hearsay between her and her friends and the school teachers. Now the police are looking for evidence, because they must have evidence, because at the crime scene, now this is how good this boy is, there was no evidence, no DNA. He knew what he was doing. He planned it. He knew exactly how to kill this girl and not leave any DNA. And that's exactly what he did. So Nicholson was a cannabis dealer. He also withheld his passwords to Facebook. Now, this is what took the police so long to get him, because the police don't actually have the right to access your data under the laws that we would usually use. And so he wouldn't reveal anything. He just kept saying he didn't know or whatever. But the police had then got his phone, which they were allowed to go through, and they did go through, and they found a text message from Lucy the night before telling Nicholson that she was pregnant. So they sort of knew the motive, but they needed now the proof, and also the charge on the girl when he was in 2012, on the 14-year-old, where he had taken her to abuse her, was the same place as where Lucy's body was found. Now, about a mile away from Lucy's body, there was a hoodie found, but it was about a mile away. So it wasn't right next to the scene. Now, on that there was DNA, but again, a mile away, it was there. And that sort of comes into it a little bit later on. But they needed to keep this man in jail, because this man, or on remand, because this man is so dangerous. Sexual predator, child sexual predator, now killer. They knew it, they just couldn't prove it. So how could you keep this man in prison? So what they did, they charged him with an RIPA murder charge for failing to comply to give out passwords. And what they had to do, because under the regulations that you would usually use, or the laws we'd usually use to get these passwords, they then had to use the terrorist legislation, because under that legislation we then can go right in to your life and your details. And under section 53 of that regulation, they have investigatory powers under that act. Okay, so it's under the act of the RIPA. So it's terrorism legislation that they got him on. But that takes time to get. So they held him then, I think, for 14 months on remand. Why this was because they had to charge him with something. So if you charge him under that, because I think that's the only way they could get him off the streets. So they charged him under that act, but also used that act then to gain the passwords, which they knew they would find evidence of this relationship with Lucy, and would find then some proof that he had done this. So a lot went into this case. These police and actually the CPS at this stage worked very, very hard to get this man off the streets. So I think the reason what he was saying, what Nicholson was saying, the reason why he didn't want to give his password out had nothing to do with Lucy's murder. So he kept saying it had to do with that he was a drug dealer, and that he didn't want to incriminate himself. But even rather than giving them passwords out, he went to prison. But then that gave the police a lot more time then to work on the DNA evidence and other evidence, and lots of CCTV evidence and hours of it to try and catch this man. And it comes down to a piece of CCTV where he's riding a bike that day around where this, in Southampton, where this leisure sort of centre, gym centre is, wearing this hoodie, which was later found a mile from the scene. So they knew that that day he had that sort of sweatshirt, hoodie, top on, and they could then link that to him. So this investigation did take a very, very long time to get this man. But I think everyone who knows this story, has worked on this story, or worked on this case, with this man needed to be caught, because this man is a psychopath. This man wouldn't have stopped. And the problem is, with a paedophile or a criminal like him, or a psychopath like him, like Stephen Nicholson, they always escalate. And he was abusing children and now going on to murder because he didn't want to be caught as a paedophile. Problem is, once you've done one murder, you're used to it, aren't you? They seem to like it and they go on to more. And so it was really important, I think, and I think the police knew that, and the profilers knew that when they were looking for this man, and the way he behaved, this man, was despicable, really. He'd rung the mother shortly after Lucy went missing and said, "Keep your chin up," and carried on building something that he wanted to build. That's all he said to her. Didn't help look, didn't ring, didn't want to know anything about her. Keep your chin up. That's what he said. Now these poor people had to go, drag them through court, because this man weren't going to admit nothing. Everything again about this man had to be proven. You had to work to get anything on this man, and then to find out that you had allowed this man in your home, you'd befriended this man because you had friends that knew him, and so you thought he was all right, they thought he was all right. As I say always, this mask of sanity, what you see and what's really behind that mask are two totally different things. And with this case is so evident with this man. He is so evil, this man, so nasty, sadistic, really terrible. And I think he got 33 years. It isn't enough. Actually, I think I got the stabbing wrong. I think it was 27 times that he stabbed Lucy. And that knife has never been found. They've never found that murder weapon to this day. So they couldn't link anything to that either. So it had to be the use of the law that got this man. It had to be the use of the terrorism legislation that was enabled these to get in then to his passwords to find out what was on there and link him, because there was nothing else linking him really. A little bit of CCTV, which you could have said, even with that top they found, if they hadn't have anything else on him, he could have just put that. It's a mile away from the scene, so a good lawyer could have argued that, really. He could have argued it. Of course the DNA is going to be on there, and even if he admitted that he was sexually abusing the child, to prove murder with a little bit of limited evidence like that can be very difficult. So they needed as much evidence as they could get to back up everything they had. So I think with what they found online, and then they could prove then that he was being abusing her and had abused her for a very, very long time. He'd manipulated her. He'd arranged to meet her there. All this sort of thing was online. This Facebook and everything else, the records, even though if you delete it, if you're under certain terrorism act, or they can request information, they can request surveillance under this legislation, and this is a piece of legislation that got him. And without that legislation, this man would be free. So I think credit has to go to this police force, the CPS at this point, really, that really worked hard to take this psychopath off the streets of Southampton, without a doubt, because this man would have committed many crimes. And as I always say, this is the only one, or the murder we know of. We don't know what else this man has done. Plus, we don't know who else he's abused. So when we talk about CCTV evidence, you're talking about 1,100 hours of CCTV evidence to go through to look at for anything for this man. They examined 2,300 exhibits, things they'd picked up around the bodies, this sort of thing, with this man, for this evidence. There was, I think, about 12 different police agencies involved in this case, about 900 officers as well, so a lot of work went into this case. I think this case highlights, again, that there are signs when children are being abused. There are signs. People are picking it up, and if people are telling people, and you're telling agencies and outside agencies and third and fourth agencies, and no one's doing nothing. It's a real shocking, isn't it? We're in 2020. This was only a couple of years ago this case happened. And his background wasn't known. I think this man was actually a care assistant as well. So he'd even got a job as a care assistant because his juvenile record was juvenile and therefore didn't show up. But he used a deadly weapon, an offensive weapon, and held people hostage, stole £1,000. These are the sort of things that should be kept on your record for a very, very long time. Because yes, kids make mistakes. But some kids, like him, go on to continue not to make mistakes, but to plan and commit serious, serious crimes. And in his case, the crime of murder and rape. So it's shocking, really, this case. It's shocking because I think, in the long run, when you really look at all the evidence in this case, that this case should never have happened. But I think we have to praise, and you know me, I don't always praise the police. Most of the time I'm slating them, really, for their investigation skills. But I think in this case, the police and the CPS work together in such a way. They use their initiative. So there's some good lawyer out there that thought this is what we've got to do to get this man. So I give credit where credit's due. And in this case, credit is definitely due. Because this man, evil man, was 25 at the time when he done this. He got 33 years. Minimum, I think, of 33 years he's going to serve. But that still leaves him at quite a young age to reoffend. So let's see what happens. I don't know whether I'm going to be here in 33 years to be doing another one on him. But this case is a very sad case. It's a very sad case of Lucy McHugh, a 13-year-old that was first raped, physically abused, sexually abused, and then murdered, stabbed 27 times because he didn't want to get caught for being a paedophile. Or that's his excuse. So I hope you found this case interesting. You know what to do. Thumbs up if you like this case. That thumbs up button there. You can subscribe, by hitting that button that Lacey puts up there, our logo. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. Thank you for your comments, and I've had them from Germany, Australia, America, France. I can't think where. There's loads. Thank you. Thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and until the next time. Bye bye.